All right, folks, thanks for sticking around for this bonus episode or the second half of the show, depending on where you're listening. If you're listening on the podcast, of course, it's all going to sound like one long show, and this is the post show. If you're checking this out and it's a separate video on YouTube, then this is the part where we usually go into deeper detail about a certain issue. Now, we mentioned on the last show, on the other video, that I had some thoughts about iPad, and rather than going into deep detail, then we figured we'll save it for a certain for a separate episode. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So as I'm watching videos about iPad OS and more information came out and information on the betas and stuff, I'm seeing a lot of this. How do I say this diplomatically? Because I don't want to, make anyone upset or target anyone in particular. Because there are a few people doing this, but there's this style of tech reporting that people go through so they can stay in the good graces of people who give them devices, right? Or give them trial. They do reviews. They don't want to say anything bad because this company sends them.
Give me stuff and I'll be nice to you.
Exactly. There's a lot of that.
Versus like we talked about this a few weeks ago, I think, where MKBHD came under fire and they were blaming him for tanking a couple of different companies.
Yes.
And so you've got somebody like him that's like, no, I'm going to do, you send me your stuff, I'm going to do what I'm going to do with it. And I'm going to do what I believe is right. Yeah.
So, and when you see people at that level, he doesn't get a lot of junk, right? He doesn't get a lot of Amazon import knockoff products to test out, right? He doesn't have time to do that. Two, I remember, I think you sent me the article, or I sent it myself, like, he can tank your stock overnight by him just not liking the direction your product is going in.
Let's be clear. The two companies that he's being blamed for tanking, or that he was, I think it's kind of died down.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't him. Their products were crap.
Right.
I mean, the Humane AI pen, which we never even really talked about, they're trying to be sold because they ship less than 100,000 units of their primary product, and then they had to issue warnings that it gets too hot, so don't wear it all the time, which it's designed to be worn all the time. So I mean, come on, right? I mean, so people were blaming him. It's not them. He did his job. He's telling his 4 billion subscribers, whatever he has, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should you consider this product, or should you not? So, I mean, I know that's not the topic for today, but you're absolutely right. So you've got these two extremes where send me your stuff and I'll advertise it and I don't care what it is, I'll talk good about it. Versus everybody else that we follow, because I don't think you and I follow many of those kinds of folks, because it's just not worth it, right? We want to follow the folks that are going to give us the real facts. And I'm okay with their opinions when they say, my opinion is, I'm okay with it, right?
Yeah. Or they give a disclaimer. Right from the start. They say, hey, this is me. I'm giving my opinion, but they did send me this for free. They did send me that. They send my whole family some, and we're all testing them out. I like those guys that they'll let you know where they stand on a product right before they start. You know what I mean? So you take everything not with a grain of salt, because some of them will still be hard on the product, but they still still test it out and still try it out and all of that. Well, on that same page, we have people who kind of, I don't want to say anything bad about Apple, because if my channel, does well, maybe one day I will be one of the vloggers or whatever that they invite to come out to a product thing announcement, or they'll invite me to come out. So I don't want to end up on some blacklist before I even get started while I'm growing my channel and blah blah blah. I'm a granddad. I'm gonna let you know your shirt is ugly, so we don't leave the house with you wearing an ugly shirt, right? I'm a dad. I'm a grandpa. I'm going to share my opinion, whether that's a popular opinion or not. So
you are going to know where I stand.
You're going to know
whether you want to or not.
So, friend of the show, Tim Cook, who listens every week, you may want to go ahead and just tune out now, because I'm going to share my opinion. If 2 or 3 years from now, the channel reaches a point where Apple says, "Hey, we want the tech grandpas to come out while we announce this new iPad." I'm gonna go, but I'm gonna let you know if it's not. You know what I mean? If it's not up to par. And iPad OS 18 is not up to par. I brought this up because again, I'm seeing a lot of these type of reviews on iPad OS, and they're like, "It's great, it's wonderful." I don't know what these guys are complaining about. There's all this controversy on the internet, and all these people are saying, they want this and they want that. What do you guys want from Apple? What do you guys want?
Hey,
So,
Jason, let me ask you a question, though, because you use the phrase up to par.
Right.
That's relative, right?
You're right. You're right. So, my main concern, my main gripe is the introduction of this super powerful, super thin iPad Pro. And I would say even the M2 iPad, which is basically the iPad Air, the current iPad Air. When I say iOS 18 is not up to par, I mean on those particular hardware products. Those particular iPad OS 18 is great, and it will be great for 90% of the people once they get their hands on it this fall, right? It even runs on some of these older devices, and I'm sure it's going to improve the performance on some of those older devices. Well, it's not on the first gen Pro. It's only on the third gen Pro and up.
Right.
I need to confirm that, but it's not on the older ones. But even on the ninth and 10th gen iPad and the what third generation iPad Air and some of those older devices, this is going to be great for anybody who is just going to receive an update, go to settings, general update, and update to iOS 18 this fall. It's going to be a great experience for them. I am talking about that. I'm not even going to say 10%. That 5% of people that they're power users. No, I'm going to say 10%. There are way more power users, iPad power users than people realize. These are the people who this is their main device, right? I have this old MacBook Air sitting down here on the floor right here, but this is my main device. So all of these complaints that I'm going to complain, these are going to be for the power users, not for the average everyday iPad users, and definitely not if it's not your main device. If you're like Greg and you have the M3 MacBook Pro, you have a powerful device, Mac Studio, a Mac Mini, or just any other device that you use as your main driver, and your iPad is just your recreational device, then yeah, you're going to listen to me and be like, well, what is this guy complaining about? Like, it's still great. And
Let
I
me throw out
understand that point of view.
an analogy here. So, at one point, science said that we use about 10% of our brains,
Right.
the capacity. And I mean, you talk about the best supercomputer in the world, it's inside of all of our heads,
Yeah.
You know what I mean there, right? So
Yeah.
the vast majority of people are only going to use 10% of what our brains are capable of doing. And guess what? That's fine.
Yeah.
They live wonderful, amazing lives. They live up to their potential, all that kind of stuff. But then there's this other group of people that really need to push beyond that 10% for whatever reason, right? So when I think about this, and I know you're going to talk about some of the specifics, I think about that. So I think about the fact that they skip clear to the M4.
Yep.
And the iPad OS is, in my opinion, only using 10%
Mm-hmm.
of what the hardware is capable of doing, right?
Yep.
And for the vast majority of people, like you just said, fine. No big deal. Yep, I'm going to pay the $2,000 because I want the tandem OLED because it's the device that I watch my 4K movies and TV shows and stuff on 98% of the time. I don't watch them on TV. I watch it on this. I want that. I'll pay the $2,000 for it. I don't need anything other than put Disney Plus and Netflix and Apple TV Plus and all that stuff on here, and I'm good to go. Right. So that's, I think you and I are saying the same thing. It's just there is so much more potential there,
Yeah.
and it's just not.
Yeah.
It's not there. Your other analogy that you've used, right, is I'm driving the Lamborghini to go to the grocery store.
Right. Right. why would you need so much power? And why would they make such a big deal about this power and not give you any way to take advantage of it? Again, a lot of the question that these people say when they're doing their reviews or whatever, it's like, what do these people want? So I'm going to give an idea, give a response to, what is it that, because I'm one of those people that they're talking about. I'm not happy with iPad OS 18. And you heard me say earlier in the first half of the show that iPad OS is great. It's just not what I want or what I need because as of now, I mean, I can do what I can do on this iPad with not even a Pro, with not even the Air. I can go and get a 10th gen iPad. Now the screen will be smaller. I want the bigger screen, but I can go and get a 512 gigabyte iPad Air and do everything that I'm doing on this now. There's no reason to even call this thing a Pro. Yes, it has a tandem OLED and all of that, the Pro feature. As far as my use case, or as far as the use cases that iPad OS 18 will allow, there's no difference between this and the Pro.
And
So,
this is the debate that I've been having, right? We'll
right,
talk
right.
about, before we wrap up here, I think we need to address the question, are you going to downgrade not to the Air, but from the 1 terabyte to the 512? And we need to
Yeah,
address the question of what I'm going to purchase.
yeah,
Keep going. I just wanted to make sure we capture that and do that before we wrap up.
right, right. So let's jump into my main issue. And this is the main issue. I'll get into some of the other things that I want or what people are saying. What do people want out of the iPad? But the main issue is this issue with we know what the M4 is capable of. We know what the iPad is capable of. But this issue to limiting you to only one audio channel is is outrageous to me. Now I say this again. I have a $2,000 device that I can only listen to one audio channel at a time. Now, most people listening will probably be like, well, why do you want to listen to multiple things at a time? No, let me explain to you what's going on. I can be streaming Pandora or any kind of music and scrolling through Reddit. Now, Reddit has these ads, these video ads, or I believe Instagram does the same thing, although I'm on their list. These video ads, my audio will stop playing. It'll stop playing the music that I'm listening to and play the ad, only the ad that's playing in Safari. That is ridiculous to be able to have to deal with. Now, again, this is a first world problem. It's not something major. I can pause the ad, I can mute the ad or whatever. But scrolling through again, eventually you're going to run into the ad and your music stops and start playing the ad. Now, again, I'm not defending ads because I don't want to hear the ad anyway. It's always playing some obnoxious music or something anyway. But let's take that to a more uh, uh, practical need that I have. That same restriction applies to Riverside. The reason why I have this expensive blue Yeti mic sitting here, but I'm using my my old earpod, is because recording through Riverside, I can only be in the app recording to get that audio or the video for that matter if I was using a camera. But I couldn't use things like my notes app, which we use to outline for the show. I couldn't read my notes app because it would pause the video or pause the audio for the Riverside app. That's what I'm talking about. So I have an M4 processor, the most powerful processor that Apple has, and the most powerful device now. It won't be the case for long because I'm pretty sure the MacBooks and the when they upgrade the Mac Mini and the Mac Studio and all that, those are going to be the most powerful devices. But currently now, this iPad Pro is the most powerful device that Apple makes, and I can't use audio and video from multiple channels at the same time. It's ridiculous, and it's one of those things where, again, I keep using this analogy. I don't want to have to wait till next season to watch the Cowboys or the Astros win. I don't want to have to wait till next year to get these features that I want now and this device that I spent all this money for, and have to wait till iOS 19 for them to get around to giving us
And
that feature.
you're not even talking about the Pro version of this issue.
Yeah.
Right? This is basic user scrolling through social media, listening to music, or has got YouTube playing on picture in picture, whatever the case may be, right? Or split screen, and not having the ability to control any of this stuff. First of all, it doesn't work. And second of all, there's no ability to control any of this kind of stuff. And so, like, when I think about doing like our church broadcasts that I used to be in charge of, right?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it from an iPad. I had to control it from a MacBook because on the iPad, I can't specify in Zoom what audio and video to use. It's gonna default. So if I'm on an iPad, it's gonna default to the iPad camera. If I'm plug in a external microphone, it's going to default to the external microphone, right? There's no controls that says, hey, I want you to use not this camera but this other one, and not this audio but this other one, even though there's different things available. And so that doesn't sound like a problem, and I won't go into all the details, but it meant in order to run our church broadcasts, there were apps for the iPhone, there were apps for the iPad, but we still had to have a PC or a Mac in order to specify and tell Zoom, hey, this is what you need to use, not whatever is being defaulted to.
There used to be, back when Apple started the whole multitasking thing, everybody was like, oh, there's not true multitasking. It's not true multitasking. And everybody was like, well, what do you mean? It allows you to run this app and it allows you to run this app. And Stage Manager has been a huge leap forward towards productivity on the iPad and allowing true multitasking and stuff like that. But to really get to true multitasking, we need to move past that single audio and video channel. And again, there's rarely cases where I want to run two videos at one time. Rare, right? You can only watch one thing at one time. But there have been cases that came up where I want to see two video channels at one time. Now, there's workarounds that I can do. It kind of works when you do picture in picture and you're watching a video in the browser on another tab and all that. You can get around that. But why? If I run into a case, the M4 processor and the GPU and stuff that's in the iPad can handle two video streams at one time. Why not allow me to do that?
16 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of
16
RAM,
gigs.
right?
Yeah.
Depending on which model you get. This shouldn't be. I mean, if that's good enough for their entry level MacBooks.
Yeah. Now, I know that's a limitation of iOS just in general, and I don't expect to fix for that overnight. But iOS didn't even take us a step in that direction to try to fix any of this.
Yeah.
It didn't. They didn't give us the least little hint. I thought it was a hint when the update for Final Cut Pro allowed like a version of Continuity Cam where you can have multiple iPads film, multiple iPhones film, and I'm like, oh wow, that's definitely a hint that some kind of API is coming where Riverside and other podcast apps or other video apps can allow you to be able to do that, but nothing. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
Not even a hint towards any of that. To answer the question, that's one of the things we want is to be able to have multiple video and audio channels at one time instead of the single one. Because although you're multitasking, I can have Safari open and have Notes open and have a video playing and all of that. It's still really just that one single video channel. Because the minute you try to play a video file or something else opens up, it's going to pause everything else and focus on that one audio stream. So that's one thing. Anyone is asking, what do these iPad guys want? Another thing. Now this is personal to me, not personal to me, my use case, but I see this use case coming, being utilized more and more, and that's being able to dock your iPad. And I say dock, it's basically what you're doing. You're connecting it to a hub or something, and you're using a monitor and an external keyboard and an external mouse and external hard drive and all of that through this hub.
Microphones, all the stuffs.
Microphone, everything. Is being able to dock that and what they call clamshell mode. And I saw this being kicked around a lot, where you can close your laptop basically, and just like I've been using the last few weeks, using my MacBook Air. It's just sitting down on the floor because I don't use the Air. I use wireless keyboard and I use the monitor here, setting up on my my little recording center. The iPad doesn't really do that. Now, it's not really a huge deal because you can use the iPad as a second monitor, right? When I had it here next to the screen, I basically had a dual screen a setup because the iPad was a smaller, 13-inch monitor, and I used the main monitor. Well, if you want to just turn the iPad off, once you hit off, it turns off the monitor and everything else too. So you're basically turning the iPad off. So I don't necessarily need the clamshell mode, but I would like to have seen a mode to where I can use the iPad as a digital keyboard and have a touchpad, quote unquote virtual magic mouse on the screen, a trackpad, I guess I should say, not necessarily a magic mouse, but give me a virtual. I can turn the iPad instead of a traditional clamshell mode where I can just turn it off and just mount it somewhere or just leave it sitting under the monitor like it is now. Still have Stage Manager and stuff where I can function as a like a desktop setup on my monitor, but put the iPad in a mode to where you only have a virtual keyboard and a virtual trackpad, right? And you're using that as your keyboard. So now I can mount it right here in front under the monitor, and I can tap on the keyboard. Still control the screen, Stage Manager on the monitor with the virtual trackpad or something like that. I'm hearing for these calls for a virtual, for a clamshell mode, but I'm thinking clamshell mode more uh, as just a mode for the iPad to do instead of using it as a second monitor. You get what I'm saying? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? I know it sounds
Yeah.
like I'm rambling because I'm so
I think so.
frustrated, but yeah, just let me keep my virtual keyboard. That way I can get rid of my $13 keyboard here, my Bluetooth keyboard, and I can have an Apple keyboard and trackpad in front of me on the iPad, but don't have to use it as an iPad. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Something like that would really make that make Stage Manager more useful and make that a pro feature.
It's sort of what they've done for Mac pass-through on Vision OS, right? Is that everything functions on your Mac except for the screen goes dark.
Yeah. So you still use the keyboard. You can still use your USB ports and stuff like that. Yeah, I want all of that. I want something similar to that mode, not necessarily clamshell mode, because I'm okay with the iPad staying on. Right, my hub has a pass through where I can plug in a power port to it, so it's actually being charged. It hadn't dropped below 80% since we've been recording. So I'm okay with the screen being on. I just don't necessarily need it as a second screen. So having clamshell mode slash another mode, let's call it virtual keyboard mode, would have helped out a lot. Nothing was remotely announced that was going in that direction to be able to use that. I did mention all of the settings seem to have saved because every time I would connect to the external monitor, now that's obviously iOS 17 that fixed that because the correction worked the last time I used it. But yeah, I connected the my iPad this week. Didn't have to go in and change any of those settings. So those settings are staying saved now. That issue worked. That was another gripe that I had, but that issue seemed to be resolved. And if Apple fixed any of these issues in updates after iOS 18 is released, 18.1 adds this feature. 18.2 adds another feature that I'm in. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with waiting until WWDC, iOS 19, iPad OS 19 preview to get these features that I want. I'm just really frustrated right now with that.
Yeah, and considering that they've announced a bunch of stuff that they said coming later this year or coming next year, I don't. And they've announced all the new higher end iPads. The only thing that's really left is the mini, unless they decide to revamp the 10th gen. They're not going to announce a big feature like that with the announcement of those two pieces of hardware. So they've said everything that's coming in the other operating system, which tells me that unless they pull a rabbit out of a hat, we don't have anything else coming in iPad OS until WWDC next year.
Yeah, and that's a bummer. That's a bummer. I spent a lot of money. I know people are going to listen and be like, "Well, you made the choice." Right, I did make the choice, and I'm happy with the choice. I did talk about downgrading and using that extra, the difference, that extra money to just go ahead and buy the keyboard, which was I think is still overpriced, and I just don't. I like the ESR when you and I keep talking about. I keep going back and looking at it. I just don't want to deal with that extra case to it. So I'm just patiently waiting for another keyboard option, hopefully one soon. But I do need another keyboard. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't see anything new coming, and I think I decided to talk myself down off of the roof. I'm probably not going to downgrade it. One, I don't have time to go and deal with the hassle of wiping it and taking it back to the store and getting another one. But
well, you're out of the window now too, aren't you? Aren't you
yeah, I
past the
think I
15-day?
yeah, yeah, it's definitely out of the window now. I'm pretty sure, maybe I can talk to a manager or something and explain to them. Still, that's still no guarantee. So I'm gonna stick with it. I'm gonna stick through it. I know, like I said, people are listening. Like, well, you're the one who spent the money. Like, why are you complaining? I'm complaining because they gave me a Lamborghini with the with the lawnmower engine in it, and it's frustrating. It's
Yeah.
frustrating. So another thing that again, I can go down a whole list of things that I want, and I'm not even going to make this a thing about, oh, well, you just want it to be perfect for you. No, I'm talking just in general for power users, not just me, not just what I personally want, but just power users in general to make this thing worth it. Is to I've been saying it for all year since we've been talking about WWDC, is wider support for external devices, more external device support is what this thing really needs. And you say, well, what do you mean by that? You can already use a mic. You can already use a camera, not at the same time. So this goes back to the other issue about the audio and video channels, adding more channels to be able to do it. But still then, it still won't support every microphone. It still won't support every camera. Widen that support. Let people add some of these old cameras and these old microphones to be able to use. Now, the old device has to be one of those driverless plug and play kind of devices. You know what I mean? Or the ones with
Yeah.
that install their own drivers. I don't mean just go and hook every old camera up to it. It has to be a modern camera and a modern microphone. But still, widen that device support. Widen to be able to adjust the settings on external monitors. If you want to be able to especially people who work with documents and forms, they like to rotate the monitor landscape, right? So you can view the whole document, especially if you're typing and stuff like that. Or one of those government jobs where you're just filling in the blanks in those documents. A lot of those users like to rotate their monitors. You don't have that option with the iPad. I would like that option to be able to rotate my monitor in landscape mode and to be able to uh, um, basically turn that orientation to. Doesn't allow that. Again, not a huge deal because I enjoy the way I use it now. But Stage Manager, this processor, the RAM that's in this will definitely be able to support something like that, and they just didn't give it to us. So
Yeah, I
again,
mean,
oh, go
they
ahead.
need to fix this at the software level, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
other thing we had hoped they were going to do this year was to release a new keyboard that had the docking station built in. Now, if they had
Yeah.
done that, they would have had to have solved this problem, right? Otherwise, they would have had a useless docking station slash hub that said, "Oh, you can only plug in one camera or one microphone or something like that,"
Mhm.
right? I mean, if they could fix this via software, let partner companies build a keyboard like that. Let a bridge
Yeah.
or somebody else build it so that it's all in one, or Logitech or ESR or whoever,
Mhm.
right? And even if you don't want to build it yourself, but like one of the limitations is that the pass-through charging on the Apple Magic Keyboard is 60 watts, so it's going to fast charge, but everybody else is limited to either you're connecting via Bluetooth or you're connecting via the USB port, and then you're not going to get that pass-through charging and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean it's just not living up to its potential. I mean, there's so many things that external parties could build for this. There's so many things that Apple could build for this. But when the software moves forward an inch and the hardware moves forward a foot, it's hard to convince companies to invest in those other 11 inches because who knows if Apple's going to
Yeah.
make it possible.
You know what the number one reason is behind all of this, and this has been my reasoning behind checking out from technology, Apple, all of these years. The whole reason why I always stayed frustrated with Apple is there's always wait for Apple to do it, wait for Apple to do it. They released a ton of new features this year, and it was all stuff that we are doing on other platforms already. The number one reason why behind all of this frustration is because iPad OS is still basically just iOS, right? I've been saying for months now, for years, iPad OS needs to break out from behind, from being in the shadow of iOS and be its own focus, just like Mac OS, just like Vision OS, just like Watch OS. This is all Vision OS is basically iPad OS, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's all just basically blown up, stretched out versions and features of iOS, and they need to get away from that to really make this, because multitasking is great. Stage Manager is great, but it's still based on iOS architecture, and it needs to be based on iPad OS architecture, and iPad OS needs to be its own separate thing. So really, at the end of the day, I have a complaint about iOS, and it has gotten improved a lot. It has gotten really better, way better than I can ever imagine. But still, it's still living in the shadow of iOS, and I think that's the main problem. Is iPad OS just can't continue to receive these updates based on this iOS architecture. They need to revamp this from the ground up. It needs to rebuild from the ground up. And, you know, iPad OS 19, iPad OS 20, they're finally going to get around to doing it, I'm sure. But they should have waited on this M4 processor. They should have made this thing cheaper instead of charging us the extra for it. Kept the price the same, or you know what I mean, around the same. Gave it an M3 processor or M2 Pro or whatever you want to call this. Don't give us so much power, so much so much advanced hardware, and then just give us a blown out, stretched out version of iOS.
Jason's sure they're going to do this in 19 or 20, like he's sure the Cowboys are going to win the next 2 Super Bowls.
We'll see. They're looking good. Every team looks good on paper, especially the Texans. The Texans fans are going crazy now. Every team looks good on paper. Let's see in the preseason.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. So, I mean, I've gone back and forth. So originally I was all in on the iPad Pro, right? I was going to get the terabyte and blah, 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 blah. And then I said, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens with WWDC. And after WWDC, you and I talked, and I think I had already kind of started leaning in the other direction anyway. And there just wasn't a reason for me to go to the iPad Pro versus the 13-inch iPad Air.
Yeah.
And they didn't do anything at WWDC to convince me otherwise. So that's where I had settled on. But then I was fiddling around with some stuff last week, and I started doing a better math comparisons, because originally I was thinking it was over $1,000 difference between what I would get in the iPad Pro, which was the 1 terabyte model, versus what I would get in the iPad Air, which was the 512. And that was the case, right? It was $1,000 difference, and you're like, there's just no way. Because the only thing I really was going to get at that point was the screen technology. So the tandem OLED, the ProMotion, right, the color, that kind of stuff, and then Face ID versus Touch ID.
Yeah.
And so, I had settled in on that, and actually had went with the crappy Starlight color so I could skin it or something like that, right? So that I didn't have to worry about conflicting colors. But then I realized, okay, that's really not a fair comparison, because if I got the iPad Pro, I don't need the terabyte model. There's just no reason, even though I begged Jason to get the terabyte, which he did. But I don't need the terabyte because it's not going to do anything that my MacBook can't do for me when I need to do it. So I actually went in and compared the 512 13-inch iPad Pro to the 512 13-inch iPad Air, and it's a $470 or something like that dollar difference between the two. So then my question back to Jason was, okay, if we're not talking $1,000, if we're talking under $500, is the screen tech and Face ID then worth it?
Yeah.
And the processor,
when I thought about
right?
Yeah. When I thought about it, the tandem OLED and the processor alone would be worth an extra $400 or so.
Especially where that was one of the big reasons I wanted the iPad Pro, is because, I don't have a 4K TV over here to my right. It's a whatever it is. I'll be lucky if it's 720p or whatever it is, right? And so, and that, at least for now, there's no TV in our bedroom. So if we wanted to watch a show or something, in the evening when the grandkids have finally crashed, whole other movie. But, then I'm going to be watching it on either Karen's iPad or mine, right? And so I'm going to do a lot of media consumption on this device. And so, yeah, you were like, yeah, I think it's worth it. So, yeah, that's what I'm planning on doing. So hopefully before next show, I'm actually going into the Apple store and doing some iPad stuff. I'm coming down on the side of the 90%, right? That this is going to be good enough. iPad OS is good enough. And could I do it all on the iPad Air? Yes. Can I afford the extra 400 or so bucks? Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and go with the iPad Pro. But if it wasn't for that, I mean, if I was on a super tight budget, there's just no way I would do anything other than that. And
also you have your Mac Pro,
yeah,
which is the most powerful MacBook that they've had,
yeah,
in years. You still have your Mac Pro, so yeah, I think
so
that's
I think
just an easy decision.
if I didn't have the Mac Pro, set aside doing the podcast and the video, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have the Mac Pro, I might think about this a little bit differently, right? And go back to the terabyte model and just to have the future proofing and some of those sorts of things. But for what I want to use this for, it's good. And then it really just did come down to budget. Do I have the budget? And Jason knows me very well. How satisfied would I be with that iPad Air, knowing that I could have gotten, that there was no reason I couldn't get the iPad Pro? So that's where I'll stand. And we're going to be doing some shuffling. I mentioned this to Jason. My oldest granddaughter has commandeered my iPad mini the last couple of Sundays and has been using the Apple Pencil and coloring, and she's so into art and stuff like that. And so the youngest grandson is on 12 point something. It's my mom's old iPad, so he can't even put Disney Plus and just lost YouTube as well. And so we're going to take the oldest granddaughter's iPad, hand it down to him. I know Jason wants me to keep the iPad for a picture frame, but I'm not going to do that. He's not going to like that answer, but I'm going to recycle that one. But my wife's ready for another iPad again with the same assumption that, hey, let's get her something a little nicer for media consumption and stuff like that. So she's going to get, she and the oldest granddaughter are both getting the 10th gens, and her, because she's in Gen 2 iPad Pro or whatever it is, it's still got plenty of trade-in value, $330.
Which is surprising, really surprising.
Yeah, really surprising. So it almost pays for, well, it would pay for an entry-level version of hers, but I'm getting the upgraded storage space for them both. So
does she need the extra space?
Huh?
Does she need that extra space? Or you just want to, just in case, future-proof it?
Yeah, so she can have a whole bunch of stuff downloaded, right? So, I mean, internet's not as big of a deal, but so she can have a whole bunch of stuff downloaded. Actually, let me open up, because I've got everything saved in my bag at apple.com. I'm not buying it that way. I think I'm going into the store because I just want to make the trade-ins easy, because so it's I've got them at the 256s. So it's not like it's the monster upgrades and stuff. And let me just look real fast. The iPad, because remember, they dropped the price, right?
Yeah.
So your choices are 64 or 256, and there's just a no-brainer for either of them.
Yeah.
Right.
I was
64
actually disappointed they stayed with the 64 and not made 256 the entry level.
Yeah, 64 is just not enough. So those are your only two options. You can't go any higher on this 10th gen. So they're going to do that. We're going to do the pink one for the granddaughter. Karen went for the yellow one, and then I've got a ESR pencil.
Awesome.
Got an ESR pencil in the Amazon cart for the granddaughter, and she doesn't need the fancy stuff for what she's going to do right now. So next week, hopefully, I'll have at least a little bit of experience with this stuff. I may not, because I think I'm going to go to the store on Monday, which means I may not have a whole lot of time to do with them. So, but over the next couple of episodes, we'll figure that out. But part of this decision is based on this conversation we're having, which is I'd go all out on the iPad Pro if I thought even in the next year or 2 years they were going to catch up the software to the hardware. I just don't think they are. So I'm not going the high end, but I want the tandem OLED for video. So calling that good.
No, good choice. I think if you were going to go with the Air, it's worth that additional, $500 to go ahead and make the upgrade. So good choice on that.
And that includes AppleCare, right? I mean, there's a $70 difference in AppleCare, so it's only $400 between the devices themselves. Everything else is the same because I'm still going to get a keyboard. I'm still going to get the Apple Pencil Pro.
Yeah. So we talked through the situation with the grandkids and shuffling the iPads and stuff. Karen is getting the best color in the yellow one. It look if they had an iPad Pro in that color, I would definitely be rocking the yellow Pro right now. So no, good choice. Good choice. I think yeah, I think all of this is the right decision to make as far as tech. Right, it doesn't justify you getting the 1 terabyte model. You don't need that nano texture screen and stuff like that. You know,
I thought about
it's
that
just
because I want to live outside.
yeah,
But I have in my cart the ESR. ESR is going to be getting some money from me. I
yeah.
have the magnetic mat that's supposed to feel like paper but also reduce glare, and it also works on top of a tempered glass screen protector.
Okay,
So as long as my tempered glass screen protectors aren't too thick, that thing is still supposed to be able to magnet on. So then I get the best of both
yeah.
worlds, and I'll
You can
only
take that
spend,
off and
I think it's like $30 for that magnetic screen protector versus the $100 for the nano texture, which would then almost defeat the purpose of me spending the $400 to get the tandem OLED, because it does reduce the sharpness and all that kind of stuff, right?
yeah.
So
You'll spend more time in control lit environments inside or in the office or in the trailer or in the house somewhere uh, with dimmer lights than you would outside. I think.
yeah, I mean, I am going to the southern part of Utah where it's been 106 and 108 degrees,
Yeah.
right? And I still want to try and live outside to a certain extent, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily out in the glaring
Yeah.
sun.
You
So,
you'll be out doing something, not
or I'll be
lounging.
out in a gazebo or
Yeah.
with it,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So, but this is all good. This has been really, really good conversation. I know it's more philosophical than maybe we sometimes try and get, and next week's going to be similar to this. Although I think our opinions are maybe even a little stronger
Yeah.
as we get into this. And for next week's show, if you don't, we always say we're not going to parent parents, and you definitely have to make decisions on how you feel about this stuff and how you want to handle this kind of stuff. But I will tell you, we're going to have some parenting opinions
Yeah.
next week on, as we talk about the role of technology in our lives and whether it's the technology that's the problem or whether it's the people using the technology that are the problem, right?
So sorry about the rant too. I know, like we got a comment one time when I was complaining about Apple likes instead of Apple cares. Someone had mentioned like, so you're complaining about. You told me to comment. I'm pretty sure there's going to be somebody saying the same thing. I complain. I still love this stuff. And at the end of the day, none of this stuff really affects our lives because if I really wanted to, I would have got a MacBook Pro instead of the iPad. I just love the iPad so much, so I'm passionate about it. I get frustrated when it doesn't do what
Yeah.
I want, but at the end of the day, I'm still considering a Mac Mini, right? I'm still considering my Mac Mini setup for my desktop right here, and using the iPad to record on and everything else. So
Well, I told you earlier, right, about my grandma. I mean, I
yeah,
bought this MacBook Pro because I had to,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
really
you needed it
had
at the
reached a
time.
point where we couldn't keep doing what we're doing with the equipment that I had, and the
Yeah,
iPad was not an option. But I was telling Jason before we hit record that my grandma, as she gets older, right? Because I'm a
that's what
grandpa,
they do.
she's the great, great grandma of my grandkids, right? So aging, and it comes with a whole bunch of things that goes along with that. And I'm not criticizing her at all, but she is just struggling more and more with her MacBook. And I would love to put her on an iPad because
Yeah,
then there's less to worry about. And even though I can deal with things like malware, and I've got programs on the Mac that help deal with some of that kind of stuff and phishing and all of those kinds of things, I still would just rather not worry about it. And it's less on iPad OS than it is on MacBook. Now, the balance there is that's going to be it's iPad OS is more secure, which is why it can't do some of these things you want it to do. So what do you want? Well, I want you to figure out how to blend both, because you've
yeah,
done a pretty good job of it in other places, just not elsewhere. So I would go all in on the iPad and iOS and watch OS environment if I could, and Vision OS too. But like you said, it's just iPad OS if I could do it. So,
like your grandmother, she's pretty handy with iOS and her iPhone anyway. You know what I mean? And as much as I complained earlier about iPad OS having to get out of the shadow of iOS, in her use case, it's perfect for her. She's already familiar with the phone. Yeah, I think that's a good move. Talk it over with her. I think moving her to iPad OS would probably be, she'll probably find more things that she wants to do, or experiment with, and find more use cases out of iPad OS than she would the phone, on iOS. So I think I think that'll be a good move for her. So keep us posted on that. Let us know when you have that conversation with her what she wants to do. I mean, I'm sure you're going to have to buy and find the iPad anyway. So
yeah, but that's easy.
Get her on the
It's
latest.
well, she needs bigger screens, so it's a 13-inch Air, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just and a keyboard to go with it because she uses it like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I'll get her to switch. I mean, as much as she's frustrated, she just doesn't like new. I mean, she doesn't even want to get new phones, even though they're running the exact same version of the operating system. So, and I understand. I totally understand.
Yeah.
So,
all right, folks. Well, let's go ahead and cut it off. I know we're running a little long. Also, I refreshed my page from the Gaming Bible link Greg sent, and Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom was announced. So I'm about to jump into this, look at some gameplay footage if there's any, and we'll give you guys an update on it next week.
sure. Jason gets to go do the fun stuff, and I get to edit the video.
Right.
That's the
I
way.
have to do my trailer, and then
Yeah.
and then it's time to relax.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Have a good one.